Okay, so now that we're called to order, let's take up the meeting minutes from March 18th. I'm sure I've read but cannot vote on. We have a motion in the minutes, or we need a motion?
Bill, I have one comment on the minutes. About halfway down the police department section, where Karen asked about the capital purchases for $45K. They responded about revamping of the communications, have the microwave and the fiber optic. I think it's important to add in there that part of the discussion we had, that this was gonna really solve a problem that we had when the Verizon cables got burned out and we were out of phones for 2 to 3 days. I mean, that was a kind of an important point. I just don't know, I think that we might want that reflected in the meeting, in the minutes. And also that Verizon was getting out of that business, I think. They're not gonna be providing that kind of business, so this is kind of taking it in-house and more than just, we're solving a real problem here and a real weakness.
Should we add it in as solve problem of reliance on Verizon for communications in emergencies?
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
Okay.
Move we accept the minutes as amended.
A second. All in favor? Okay. Any opposed? Okay. Mr. Mallard, we're all yours.
Great. Well, I won't take too much of Hutch and Jim's thunder here. I forwarded to Bill today a copy of the amended reserve guidelines, the financial reserve policies that both the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen adopted last year. 2 amendments are included in that. One is language to talk about, create some rules around the idea of a special education reserve stabilization fund, which I presented both in the budget and the financial forecast, and it's been sort of thrown out there as a dialogue. So within the draft warrant, the warrant circulating being analyzed and ultimately adopted by the Board of Selectmen is an article which creates a Special Education Stabilization Fund under Chapter 40, which is like the other stabilization funds we have, but this stabilization fund is for dealing with unforeseen situations within special education. And what I've said is associated with that, the answer really are the questions that the public will have, this board will have, others will have, is that we needed a financial reserve policy like we have for the rest of our stabilization and other reserves, which describes what it's for, how it will be used, how it will be replenished, and those kind of things. So I've circulated a draft internally, including school folks, and now we'll broaden that to include Bill and the Board of Selectmen to start to get some feedback of whether or not, because ultimately that reserve policy will need to be as amended, approved by both the Finance Committee and the School Committee. There's no statutory guideline to do that, but really out of transparency, the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen should really feel like that the document represents who we are. So I've made that amendment. Also in a conversation that's really been sort of passing, some anecdotal conversations about the OPEB and the concept of OPEB trust. The current article in the warrant talks about a $500,000 transfer from the Health Insurance Trust Fund, which is where we took $1 million from last year for OPEB stabilization. Initially, it places it into an OPEB trust. The trust was created under the enabling statute, I think it's 32B20, back in 2010 by town meeting. But then no funding was placed in it, if you remember that whole conversation. There seemed to be an interest of this Finance Committee to want to use the trust. And so I've recommended that $500,000 be moved from the health insurance, so I keep on using the word trust, the Health Insurance Trust Fund to an OPEB trust fund. The reason for that number is that it's the next phase, and it gets to the minimum threshold allowed for those funds to be invested by the state's PRIT fund. So we would, in essence, transfer that fund to an organization that invests public money very successfully, quite frankly, and get it out of our bank accounts, which are running, 75 basis points, more in the tune of 7 to 8%. So that 500,000 we would expect in the long term, 7, 8, 9, 10 years will go past the $1 million that was originally invested and start to grow at some meaningful level. So it should also be noted that as a trust fund, the bond rating agency actually count that as our way of addressing the OPEB liability. The $1 million was a compromise, in fairness, the methodology by which we chose to create the account. But we knew from the beginning that, one, it wouldn't earn a lot of interest, and two, bond rating agencies don't consider that a $1 million investment we made in the stabilization when evaluating our credit rating. They don't view stabilization funds as a true means of addressing an OPEB liability. They do, however, recognize trusts established under the statute that we established several years ago. So we can present this to them and say this is another step in our efforts to be a fiscally stable and strong community. So that's what I've provided you with, and again, any feedback the group has ultimately, I'll be looking for voted support by both the Selectmen and the Finance Committee on the amended reserves. Not a requirement to get the OPEB the SPED stabilization passed, but certainly in terms of the way we do business, this is a partnership. We should want to agree to the sort of rules of the road relative to how to use those dollars. Any questions for me about that, or?
Was there a document?
I just
No,
gave it
I
a
mean,
bill.
honestly, I got the document, and then 5 minutes later, the phones of my entire business went out.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to put on bill. My apologies. So we did the internal circulation, made some amendments to it. It wasn't intended to say I expected you'd have it today. I'm here to say it exists.
Right.
We've created a framework. I promised to get you something. We've finally gotten to it and forwarded the bill, but I certainly didn't expect that you'd have it in front of you to talk about. That's why, and I certainly don't expect any action. It's something that at a meeting early in April we'll have a more detailed conversation about. But I think it is fair. It's okay. I don't see it as any kind of violation to the open meeting law. If individually you want to provide us some input about what's been amended or have questions, let us know. That way, rather than coming to a meeting where we're starting with the questions,
Right.
anything we can do, I think it governs my concept of what the intention was of the SPED reserve, and I will have some floors and constraints as to what I'd be comfortable with in presenting, as will the Board of Selectmen. It was intended for a purpose, And I think we've done a pretty good job of defining that purpose, so sort of some things we wouldn't be amenable to, but the point is that we should generally agree to what its purpose is.
So that's for the special education stabilization.
Correct.
But then you also mentioned the OPEB trust?
Yeah,
And-
yes, sorry.
I had a question on that because on page 25 of the main budget document,
Yep.
it said that that fund should be eliminated.
Correct.
So now we're not eliminating
Well,
it, we're
Great
gonna fund
question.
it?
So, 2010, town meeting approves the creation of a 32B Section 20 OPEB trust fund,
Mhm.
a new statute which allowed communities to set aside dollars specifically for the OPEB liability. North Andover adopts that section. In an effort 2 years later to put some dollars in there, to start to add some dollars behind the concept,
Right.
there was disagreement as to whether or not that was the right method. Should we be
Ah.
using that trust? And the compromise position, which is fine, I was part of the compromise, I'm fine with it, was that
Right.
we create a stabilization fund rather than this kind of fund.
And that's where the million went.
And the million went to the stabilization fund. So at the time, the feeling was, well, if we're gonna do this, why do we still have this fund if it's just gonna sit there without, use?
Mhm.
And it generally seems like this sentiment is improving, that the trust is also a meaningful way to handle this. And so, one of the amendments is to strike that note that you've referenced,
Okay.
because it obviously doesn't work that well. So one of the amendments you'll see on a red line version of the policies you're referring to would strike that recommendation and instead, and not eliminate the OPEB as a stabilization, but add to it the concept that you could also put money into a trust. So the stabilization exists, it's $1 million. I'm not recommending we move that million somewhere else. I see this as two different ways, right? The more diverse we can be, the more flexible we can be. Keep the million in the stabilization, we add $500,000 to the trust, gives us two different ways to manage the OPEB, see what the temperature is and the feeling is. We think in 17 we'll have another $500,000 would likely place in one of the accounts. We'll then see how the reaction is to that. Maybe in the long term, as folks see the $500,000 growing at 7 and 8%, look at the million not growing, we'll transfer money from the stabilization into the trust. So the new language basically doesn't eliminate the stabilization, it adds to the OPEB reserve area a new tool, and that is the trust.
And you think the bond raters will still give us some credence for the $1 million stabilization fund?
No, they don't really, they just look at it as regular reserves and not as an OPEB liability.
And they're not likely to change?
Well, they'll look at the $500,000 if it's approved, because that'll go into a trust.
They'll look at that.
Right.
Sort of thought last year they were somewhat impressed that we were putting something like,
They're impressed generally with the general direction of our reserves. So it's not like they discount the million. They look at the million as part of a general reserve balance of which they see us trending positively, but specifically to address the OPEB issue.
okay, so there may be other reasons why we could get into that $1 million stabilization fund other than the OPEB.
Yes.
Oh, okay, and so it's not dedicated, and therein lies the rub.
There's the rub. You don't really
Okay.
need it.
Yeah.
It's a good thought, we know what you were trying to do, but until you put into a fund where it can only be that and could not be used for another purpose,
Mhm.
you really mean what you're saying. So that's the way they've evaluated credits up to this point.
Well, I hope the investment performance will be good.
So, again, however those get circulated somewhere in the next couple of weeks, I guess we'll have a conversation, fine tune that, but whatever feedback you have, more than happy.
Yeah, so I think that'd be good if we could all take a look. I just forwarded it around. If we could all take a minute and maybe submit questions over email, and then they
Whatever
can
you
be
like. Just, rather than collectively, just individually.
individually,
Yeah,
correct, and then we can.
Let me know your thoughts.
Okay.
I will respond to each one of you individually, whether or not reasons why it makes sense or doesn't make sense, and then we'll find a collective way to bring that all together at a future meeting.
I'll make sure it's on the agenda for the next two meetings, so if we're ready to make a decision next week, we can make a decision if we need. We need some more time to process.
Okay, it'll be taken up by the Board of Selectmen at their April, I don't know what day, keeps on moving. I think it's April 14th right now.
Okay.
April 14th, April 15th.
Good.
Okay.
We have time as well. Okay. So that's the OPEB reserve and the general reserve question. And then there was a facilities master plan.
Yeah, we're evaluating, so we had a really interesting week at Town Hall this week. Lynn has survived. We had 3 boilers. Expected to have 3 to 5 years left. They were replaced as part of the rehab project. So we started to realize a couple of weeks ago that they were trending in a way which we started to contemplate whether they should be replaced as part of the work we're doing on the fire station side. From when we last spoke, it got worse. One died, whatever the right term is technically. One is no longer. 2 limped along, and we lost heat for 2 entire days on the first floor. The building was about 55. Was not making for a fun work environment and other related. So anyway, it was slightly warmer on the second floor, except in Lynn's office. That for some reason her office did well. I think they knew where the money was, Lynn. We did not contemplate as part of the facility master plan a replacement of the boiler and heating systems. And there are other systems connected to that. Boilers themselves are not particularly expensive, like $15,000 a piece. We have 3 boilers, but the other mechanical systems with it, we didn't necessarily replace that. So we started to look at that before this problem to see if, as part of expanding into the fire station, there would be a sort of a universal efficiencies to link the systems, rather than putting one system over here. The new building, by the way, and we'll be rolling out plans on this, it isn't 2 separate buildings. It really is a unified building. You'll be able to walk a loop between both sides. It's not going to be this side and that side. You will be in a single front door town hall with access to everybody. So we started to look at possibilities of creating some efficiencies rather than just putting a brand new system on the fire side. And then compounded with the events of this week, we're evaluating the possibility of making some changes to what we originally thought we were going to fund on the HVAC side. I'm meeting again with the architects and engineers and our HVAC folks on Friday. But I may come forward with a recommendation of about a $300,000 change to the facility master plan request. The overall cost to do what we may propose ranges from that number to a number double that. But it's our expectations that we would make other value engineering changes within the program. So we're going to absorb some of it. That's always been our commitment. We don't just pass the buck along. So we will make some changes to our plan to absorb some of it. The fire station is several $100,000 under budget. That's one way in which we may manage it as well. In aggregate, the gym was $50,000 over, the school department building's within $10,000 of the budget, and the fire station's a couple $100,000 under. So the 3 first projects we have in aggregate have been on time and in total under budget. So we're going to absorb some of this. We just may come back and say, if we're going to do this, let's do it once and do it right. The alternative, I may be changing some HVAC equipment in 2 years in a capital plan, and you're going to wonder why we're doing that, having just rehabbed the building. So I don't have a firm number. I want to make sure that we know what we're talking about, but I may come back and request an amendment to what you've approved for the capital plan. And my guess is the 300,000 number is about right, but I'll know more on Friday.
So we're gonna do a whole kind of central AC plant with a chiller or a cooling tower or something? Or?
Yes, to bore people other than Bill, because I know he likes to speak to us, more other people than Bill. We currently have a 2-pipe system, which means during what they call the shoulder seasons, the seasons when we're not quite sure if we're warm or cold, the system can only run in one mode. That is the current system. So if we're on heat mode like we are today, and tomorrow is 70, then it's going to be warm in the building, and we cannot switch to AC unless we switch the entire system to AC. That's not about whether the boiler works. That's the way the system was designed and implemented 12 years ago. So a 2-stage or 2-pipe system, which means it's either hot or it's cold, and you can't just switch the button.
It's not easy to get to.
And so you got to go on the roof, and it's a process, and it's fine. You know, you do it. But once you do it, here's what happens the next day. It's really cold. And everybody says, where's the heat? And they turn on the heat, and heat doesn't come out because we have a 2-pipe system. If we do this, then we're going to likely, depending on cost, go to a 4-pipe system so that it literally is like the central AC if someone has that in their home. You need heat, you call for heat. You need cold, you call for cold. You don't need to change the system over seasonally. If we don't change the system, we just do some minor upgrades, we're not going to do that. I mean, that's the system we've worked in. So we're evaluating the options in terms of both efficiency, office climate, and those kind of things to come up with But we have an engineering firm that specializes in MVP stuff, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, who's designing the whole thing, deciding, giving us some options from a cost perspective. And we'll decide what we think is both efficient and practical. Will always be both.
Yeah, because if you use like water source heat pumps, you could be getting solar load in the front, on the south side of the face of the building, and that could be, you're rejecting heat in that part of the building and cooling, and then you push that hot water over to the cooler side of the building that's in the shade and use it as heat. So it's got
And part of the balance we have in this wonderful, they're great buildings, but part of the balance we have is we've reconstructed an historical building.
Right.
Some of the more modern technology wants to put this equipment in ceilings. I'm not going to even spend the money if I have to lower the ceilings, which really capture the historical architecture, to sort of this, sorry for it, but like this mode. We currently work about 2 feet above the window arches, so you get the sense of volume you have in a historic building. Some systems, as this system would be, that's all in the ceiling.
Yeah.
And so you're dropping the ceiling to accommodate the equipment up above it, and to deal with heat loss and those kind of things. I don't want to do this in Town Hall, because then I've lost the historical piece. So we may have to live with a 2-pipe system, because in order to maintain the historical integrity of the interior of the building, even though it's not ideal, it's a reasonable outcome. So we're balancing maintaining the historical look of the building internally, which is not protected in any way, other than the fact that it's the right thing to do, with new systems and how those systems may require typically ceiling mount, where today if you walk in Town Hall, you see a lot of sort of under window mount. That afforded us the ability to capture more room height, and the systems have gotten more modern, so they're smaller and narrower, and we're trying to make sure that we can do both if that's possible. On that, minor issues, they're just...
One more question on that. I did hear you use the word efficient, so I just wanted to make sure that this engineering firm you're working with, if you do redo the whole system, after everything we've done with Amoresco and everything, that you're making sure that we're getting the most efficient system and maybe some newer kinds of technologies as well.
Well, the good news is, if we're replacing 12-year-old technology, it's inherently more efficient. The balance around the efficiency piece is, I can tell you the more efficient systems are the ones that are in the ceiling. But if that means I'm lowering the heights of those ceilings, then we may complete the project, but you won't be talking to me next year. Someone else will be sitting in the seat.
Yeah.
So it's a balance. It's a balance of creating enough efficiency and efficient systems with some of the limits to the fact that you want the building to maintain a sort of historical integrity. But the systems will inherently be far more efficient than even 12-year-old systems, because 12 years has been a long time in the efficiency piece. And we're doing some other steps internally to make the building more efficient, because we're finding that we need to do some work around the windows that were replaced years ago. We find them to be less than ideal, and so we're doing some work. If you're in your conference room, you notice they're not ideal, so we're doing some work to create some efficiency there as well. So efficiency is important, and we're sort of balancing that out, keeping the building historical.
Yeah, good to hear. I was sure you were doing that. And I'm sure also that Amoresco had other suggestions in that building that were already, or are planned to be.
Yes, there were improvements. We just didn't upgrade the boilers, because at the
Right.
time, the feeling was the useful life didn't allow for the kinds of payback that we originally thought. And what we're finding is that we lost one in the process, and that happens sometimes.
Okay. Anything else for Andrew?
Just a question, and
Yes, sir.
obviously you didn't anticipate it, but is there any other building boiler system that has got similarities that you've just experienced in Town Hall?
No, I think what we find with boiler systems generally is we do have regular preventive maintenance contracts, and yet at times we wake up one day and something isn't operating the way we thought it would. So we have a good sense or inventory of those systems. It's interesting, using your question, so this is a 12-year-old boiler. The useful life in some of these things can be 12 to 15 to 16 years. The rooftop unit's 15 to 20 years. And yet that boiler could have lasted 25 years, or it could last 9 years. We happen to be on the wrong side of whatever equipment was installed here. And so we know what the vintage is of the equipment. We have a general idea of when it would need to be replaced. And then we have to be flexible enough. This is a good case of, the capital money within the building money in the capital plan. this provides us the flexibility to go spend just under $20,000 to replace one of the boilers and another several thousand to make sure the equipment is changed the other. So we feel comfortable where it is, and we're placed in a replacement cycle. We then just have to deal with the anomaly, the unusual circumstance that I think the winter caused a lot of damage that we're just not aware of. And one final one I'll leave you with is now, the state, through a supplemental grant, has provided the town $123,000 for pothole repair. That is in addition to the Chapter 90 money and can only be used by potholes and must be used by June 30th. So we will be aggressively spending the state's money for, especially the one right out front here. I fell in, I needed a ladder to get out, I didn't know what to do. It's the state, yeah, so you get the state police crews over here. I was half wondering if they would hit the bump and report it in themselves. It was a state police car over in the parking lot.
Did you say that, what was the number?
$123,000
For potholes?
for potholes.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's great.
You can't use it for anything else?
Nothing else,
Wow, that's.
which is good, that's okay.
Yeah, they've offered, we need to not spray painting them all.
So we're aggressively, we're
Yeah,
aggressively
Johnson,
doing
they've
that.
already spray painted around them.
Great, thank you.
Great, thanks.
Don't move
He
me.
made someone think something man had to move, but HVAC seems to work. That's, I mean, what's up with that? It's just amazing.
Job security. All right, we're all set. Dr. Hutchinson?
All set? All right, Jim's gonna start it off.
Okay.
For those of you who may not know me, I think most of you do, I'm Jim Neely, Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations in the school department, and we have Kevin Hutchinson, Superintendent in the school department. I'm going to do, it's kind of a combination of last year's presentation to the school, to the FinCom. The reason I'm doing that is it seemed like people appreciated seeing what all aspects of the school department budget, all funding sources of the school department. And we have at least 3 new members, so I thought it made sense to do that again. And then the second half of the presentation is the presentation that the superintendent gave to the school committee earlier this year. So with that said, we're going to talk about the funding sources, the total annual school budget, what it all adds up to, and then Hutch will give us a budget overview. So there are different funding sources. And people could even stretch it out to find others, including parental contributions to classrooms, but we didn't go that far. We have general fund, we have revolving accounts, grants, circuit breaker, capital projects, indirect expenses, and shared expenses. So general fund, annual operating expenses, we're all familiar, that's what we're looking at tonight. They include salaries, contracted services, supplies, all of those. Funded through local taxes, governed by federal and state regulations and state procurement laws, and funds can be transferred between budget lines during the year, and thank God that they can be. It's a large budget with a lot of moving parts, and things change, and having that flexibility to go from one line to the next is critical. Although, I mean, they all show up as journal entries, so you can see the history of whatever happens. Revolving accounts are different. They are set up for specific programs. Revenues come in and expenditures go out only as much as the revenues come in. Source of funding is from fees and donations. Some of them are independent of the general fund completely, and they operate like enterprise funds. Those include food services and community programs. And then others are in conjunction with the general fund, which means some expenses are paid out of the general fund and some expenses are paid out of the revolving account. Transportation is a good example. Fees are collected for riders who want to ride, who we do not have to give rides to. They pay the fee, and those fees can be used to help with the cost of transportation. Same with athletics and preschool. Grants supplement the general fund. They're funded by federal and state funds, governed by strict rules, and much more restrictive in making changes once the budget has been approved. You have to get it reapproved if you want to change the lines, or you can't transfer it from one line to the other in a grant. Amount of these grants approved annually by the awarding entity, and they include special education grants, Title I grants, and professional development grants. Circuit breaker is a good one. Circuit breaker is the only one that's really a reimbursement And what's unique about it is it's the only one that I can think of, there might be another one, that comes directly to the school department. Everything else, and I know Karen has participated and Marta has participated, Tim as well, in the Revenue and Fixed Cost Committee. And you see all of the sources of revenue that come into the town, and they go into, let's say, this single pot and then get distributed. Circuit breaker is the only one that doesn't go into that. It is a reimbursement that comes directly to the school department, and is the reason why when you look at our out-of-district budget line, that it might be 3.4 million when our expenses are 5 million, because we're getting 1.6 million in circuit breaker money. And the way it's calculated is that any student who costs the district 4 times more than the state average per student, and in that particular year it was 10,128, I think now it's 10,400 and something. But if you multiply that by 4, you get $40,000, almost $41,000. Anything over that for a student is reimbursable the following year. So in this case, mostly out-of-district students, the average cost of an out-of-district student is about $65,000, $66,000. So $25,000 or $26,000 of that student, and if they get services, it's even more. So anything over that $41,000 is eligible to be reimbursed the following year at a maximum of 75%. So what it all means is we were eligible this year for $1.4, I think it's $2.8 million in circuit breaker reimbursement. And next year it'll be even more because we'll have more eligible expenses than we did this year. The only fluctuation there is that the maximum is 75%. That was the goal when it was created, but you'll see in this chart that they don't always reimburse at that rate. It depends on funding available in any one given year. It's been as low, as you can see in FY10 and FY11, as 40%. And the only saving grace that we had in those years were the years when we got ARA money and SFSF money that helped us get through those years. But then they made an effort, and as you can see in the last few years, to get it closer to 75%. What you're looking at is the red is what we actually are getting, and the gray is what 75% would have been. So you can see we're closer. It's
Those
1423 is the number.
ARA, and what do they do?
Yeah, if you remember, I'm trying to remember, something relief.
Okay.
Recovery.
Recovery Relief Act, exactly. And then SFSF was similar to that, and we ended up being able to, instead of having to lay off people, we were able to keep the staff that we had, and then in the years when the circuit breaker money went back up, we were able to keep them so that we were able to get through those years when a lot of school districts were laying off. So, and the capital projects you're familiar with, used to build, replace, or improve the facilities, grounds, and mechanical and technological infrastructure. Primary source is through local taxes, part of the town's overall capital improvement plan, and you see these in the school department budget as an indirect cost. Now, it doesn't, where that affects us is when we do our end of year report, we have to report direct and indirect costs, and that's how it's reported. So indirect expenses are annual expenses not included in the operating budget. They're through the local taxes. They include employee benefits, borrowing costs, insurances, and functions performed by other departments. We're charged there's no transfer of dollars, but we have to assign a cost to the functions that are performed by the DPW for the school department or for the finance department in town hall. So that it's kind of proportioning out the expenses to where they properly belong. Shared expenses are consolidated accounts which include technology and facilities. So annual expenses, part of the operating budget for those two departments and are funded through local taxes. They're consolidated departments, and the services provided include both shared expenses and individual. In technology, shared expense would be the infrastructure, the internet capacity that we have town-wide. In specific expenses, there are staff that are unique to the school department and staff that's unique to the municipal buildings and departments. So, what do the numbers look like? Our general fund for FY16 that we're proposing is $43,612,479. Circuit breaker, this will be a different number. I would anticipate it being more. They're saying that in all likelihood, the percentage of reimbursement will go down from 70 to 68%. So when you look at it, it's probably about $80,000 to $100,000. But we'll be up because our claims are much higher. So we'll probably be up around 1.7 in reimbursement. Our grants are changing in some places, and they change slightly each year, but in this case, our Title I is going up. That's a trend, not a lot, but some. And then the kindergarten grant is probably going away, according to the proposed governor's budget. So that might be a zero. We'll have to see what happens. And then we have the revolving accounts. This is the same, if you look at it, as last year's, because that hasn't been approved yet. They go to the school committee, April 9th is our next meeting? So in April, they'll be finalized, and then we'll change. We don't anticipate that changing much at all. It's usually pretty consistent. And then the indirect costs, this one did change. The total, you can see what's included, retirement contributions and health insurance, and other regional school assessment. We have schools that go to charter schools or vocational schools that we have to pay for. But the total indirect is 13,220. One more. We have the shared expenses. This has gone down slightly, mainly because in technology, we had $100,000 in equipment replacement, and that's gone back down to 20. It was like a 1-year infusion to help us get back to where we needed to be for computers.
Can I stop 1 second, just go to the indirect expenditures?
Yeah.
1 second. So as I went through, looking through, looks like, health insurance is coming down. That's down 38%, which is great. Employer retirement contributions is up, almost 9%. And then insurance for retired school employees is up 194% over last year. So is that OPEB kind of affecting the school
No,
department?
it's a redistribution. We used to get charged through the state assessment on the retired teachers, and now we have to take on the full burden of it. If you recall, on last year's budget, we saw the big swing where the assessment from the state for the retired teachers went completely away. It was like $1 million.
Oh, okay.
$1.2 million, I think it
Right.
was. So that shifts. Now it's being shifted up to here because we have to carry them on our insurance now. They no longer can go through the state because we are with the state when we move to the GIC.
I see, okay.
So it's just a shifting of the allocation.
Okay.
So now
it's
it'll
almost
show
like.
up on here.
Right.
Yep.
So you do see fluctuations, and I did highlight the main one. If you look at, for FY16, you add those all up, and you get almost $64 million, which I looked at it since FY08, that's an average of 1.5% increase per year for the total cost of education in North Andover. But then when you look at FY15, FY16, I highlighted the big reason why we're actually paying less. Now, some people would say, wait a second, why are we paying less for education in FY16 than we did in FY15? Well, we're seeing more in the general, we're seeing more in available funds for direct costs, but we're paying less in indirect costs. Mainly, the move to the GIC has really decreased the amount we pay in healthcare insurance. So overall, it's actually decreased the total cost. And you see different fluctuations. Like I said, circuit breaker in any 1 year can really fluctuate depending on what's available. Or grants would jump up. If you looked at grants in FY10 and FY11, it would be 2 or 3 times that amount because of the ARA money and the SFSF money. So for the projected increase, the requested increase for FY16, it is 3.5%, or $1.474 million. Going into the budget, our focus was to retain the necessary teaching positions that we have, to maintain class size per school committee guidelines. Now, when we say that, if you look at the guidelines, we're not at those guidelines, so we're not maintaining that. What we're trying to maintain is reasonable class sizes. We have what we think are reasonable class sizes. There's factors that tie into whether or not you could impact it. One is, a lot of people don't realize how much it would cost to actually impact class size. It's a huge number. If you looked at elementary, if you wanted to impact class sizes across elementary by one student, it would cost you $500,000 that you'd have to sustain every year going out. To say nothing about the fact that we don't have any space. We're full, and we're fortunate in North Andover that while we're full, our enrollment projections are to be level and then slightly down in the coming years. Now that can always change, but for right now, that's what the projections are.
Jim Friegel?
Yep.
The transition to performance-based budgeting, wasn't that an objective, or wasn't that the initial goal for FY15 as well?
It was one, yeah. So I'm still on this slide.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So we want to identify technology to support teaching and learning, and Stan can speak better than anybody about the struggle to identify what really makes sense with regards to technology, how it can benefit teaching and learning. And we're still working through that, and we think we're going to get it. But that's always a goal. So improved progress of high needs learners. When we look at, if you've heard the term about level 1, it's what you aspire to be level 1, all your schools, and then if all your schools are level 1, you're a level 1 district. When you look at what will get you there, it's usually the scores of the high needs learners, that if you can impact them, you can get to level 1. So that's why that's a focus. Provide effective and efficient special education services and initiatives. We've done that over the last few years by adding programs that we normally would have had send students out of district to pay $66 or even more $1,000 per year. But by hiring a teacher and 1 or 2 paras, the cost of that being about $75,000 to implement a program, all you need is 2 students, and you're being more efficient and you're keeping them in district, which is usually the goal. And then transition to performance-based budgeting. The idea there is, and we did start this last year, to whatever initiatives we propose, to also identify measurements. How are we going to monitor how well that initiative is doing, and whether it makes sense to continue it, to alter it, or to just get rid of it and try something else. So that's what we talk about when we talk about performance-based budgeting, is identifying those measurements. And we're still, as a leadership team for this presented budget, coming forward to the school committee with our measurements, our identified measurements. So those will be coming forward soon.
One piece to add to that, for the explanation, we've been working with the state on a pilot project for our strategic plan. That, and we took that format and we're applying it now to the performance-based budgeting, which our facilitator thought was a pretty nifty idea. We haven't presented that Jim said to the school committee yet, but we're looking at every single initiative that we're saying we're doing new or revising. How are we going to measure success, so that when we get into the following year's budget season, we can begin to say, okay, should we be continuing going this direction or not?
What kind of metrics, out of curiosity? Is it dollars? Is it grades? Is it the performances? I know
It's typically, we're not looking, I can't say we're looking at the dollars, although you have to say, this is what we spent on it. What are the results we're getting? And it's typically student performance results.
So when we're putting the budget together, we look at, we get the leadership team together, and this happens every year, and we look at things that we might be able to do without, and identify those first. And then we determine the cost of, if we were just going to continue with what we have, if we were bringing all our staff forward with the salary increases that are contracted, we'll talk to our contracted service vendors, our out-of-district replacement providers and get the sense of what's going to happen to those rates. Are they going up? And then apply that percentage. And then so we determine what level services is going to cost us. So just doing what we're doing this year going forward. And on average, each year, that's about 3%. And it was just over, it was like 3.02% this year, so it was right on that average. And so with a 3.5% increase, that left us with $210,000 to work with to do some initiatives. But in addition, we are also moving, as I think most people know, to the new admin building once it opens up, right at the start of the year, fiscal year, over across from Kittredge. So that will save us a lease of $92,000, freeing those funds up. And then utility savings, I think Andrew Mailer has explained that that's staying in the budget, so that becomes available as well. So that means we then had $582,000 for initiatives. But then we had to back out what we project our additional out-of-district costs are going to be. And this is always the most difficult part of the budget, trying to determine out-of-district costs. The past couple of years, we've had growth, not a positive term in this case, in that area, and we've had to really impact the rest of our budget by freezing the budget and kind of coming up with funds as best we can, and using up whatever contingency we had set aside. So we project right now, based on current student population, that will be $270,000 more that we had to add, and that left us with $312,000 for our initiatives. And I've already talked about this, what went into level services, current staffing and service levels, inflation, and it was at 3%. The town manager has also talked about the Special Education Stabilization Fund, and really the greatest impact that has for us is that being available will help us in situations like this year where we put a freeze on in October and told the principals, only spend absolutely what you have to spend. Don't do anything creative, just to get through the year. And then when things come up, it really becomes deferred maintenance, because if it can wait till July, it's going to wait. So this will help in that regard. And so what we do as a leadership team is we create our priority list based on initiatives and identify needs. And then we prioritize them, rank them, and then based on the fact that we had $312,000, now it might seem like a coincidence that that fifth item totaled exactly that amount, but basically what happened was when we talked about K-5 computer replacement, that number was originally $100,000. So we brought it down to the number we had in that case. And then you can see the other items, and being on the list doesn't mean it's necessarily a need. It's the list that gets put together by the team. They're both needs and nice to haves, but we definitely identify in the green those things that we really think are important.
What was the overall guideline to come up with that ranking?
Yeah, it's a struggle every year because the leadership team is made up of superintendent, myself, the other assistant superintendent, and the school principals, who are, you've got 5 elementary, you've got 1 middle school and 1 high school, so it's always a struggle to determine how we're going to come up with the priority list, because you have 5 votes to 1 middle school and 1 high school. So we really have to talk it out, and basically what it comes down to is what is the greatest district need, what will have the greatest benefit on student achievement. And so we come up with this. People accept it, not always happy about it, but they accept it.
So the theme to be a level 1 district, does that?
Yep, it does. And Hutch was talking about, for the first time really since I've been here, we're doing a much better job of tying the budget and any initiatives to the strategic plan in the district, which are tied to student achievement based on getting to level 1. So it's really coming together.
So can you explain how a 6th grade teacher, that's the top priority? Why is that? That would make this easier for me to wrap my head around. How did that end up being the top priority?
Because we've been neglecting it for years, that's one,
Fair
that's
enough.
the middle school principal's view. Really, when you look at it, pretty simplistically, when you look at 7th and 8th grade, there's 15 teachers in each grade. In 6th grade, there's always been 14. And typically in 5th grade, there's 15. So class size historically has just simply been unfair to the 6th grade. You can look at it very simply like that. This year, the middle school principal wanted to do some reconfiguration with teams. And if she knew she would be able to have 15, that would set in place a configuration that she wanted to move to. It allows us simply to be more consistent with staffing, which makes a big difference with the impact on students. If you're always moving one teacher out, one teacher in, and creating that shift, what you're going to do is you're having different teachers teaching different subjects all the time, which means you're not going to get the same output. And you also have to be able to say, we know there'll be some fluctuation in class size. Right now, we have a bubble in 6th and 8th grade, and our smaller class in 7th grade. So you know you're going to have a little bit of fluctuation for us class size, but it's more important to try to keep some consistency with the teacher teams. Because middle school, if you're familiar with the middle school model, it's about teaming, which is, if you've had middle school children, it's just the age. They really benefit from that consistency with the teaming. And so the middle school has been asking for this for a number of years. And we said, let's make sure it happens this year, especially with a reconfiguration of the teaming. So we thought that would best address the needs and consistency with the students.
Had there been evidence of 6th grade students not performing as well because of that?
Yeah, you
lack of
really
teacher?
can't, you really can't
really
put it, you
down
can't
to
put your
that.
finger on one teacher. Really, it's
Right.
about, if teachers have the opportunity to team well together, you'll be able to then impact teaching practice. And you'd like to say, we want student achievement to improve. Well, guess what? If teacher practice doesn't improve, it's not going to change your student achievement. So you have to be able to say, what can we do to reconfigure, to have teachers working closer together in teams, to collaborate stronger, to look at their practice, therefore to change their practice. It's part of our supervision evaluation tool now. They work together collaboratively, set team goals for student achievement, and therefore, when you set a STEAM goal for student achievement, that means you're also setting a goal for yourself to impact your practice. So it's not easy to say, well, we can simply say, if we improve the teaching practice, that level of collaboration, you won't necessarily see it immediate. Next year, maybe you will,
Right.
but over time you will. And what we want to look for especially is, you're not looking just at the scores, you want to look at student growth. So in the past, we were always judged on scores alone. Now, there's a component of student growth as well. So for instance, we've been seeing some very positive trends at the middle school to say they have some of the best positive growth in the district.
And how's that measured?
It's measured by, I'm going to give you a simple version.
That's
okay?
great, that's what I want.
Because it's not simple. Basically, every student has a history of a score. Now, when you're measuring student growth, and this is leveling the playing field, each student then is put in a like scoring cohort of across the state.
Right.
Students that have scored like them across the state. The next year, that same cohort is looked at, and some of that cohort will grow, some will not, will actually go down, and others will stay the same. What you want in your school system is for your students to be in that higher growth area, and that's where teachers have huge impact.
Okay.
It's probably a good idea just to mention the 5 that we did move forward, that being the 6th grade teacher. High school guidance and education materials is a product of, when I first started, and hard to believe, but I'm finishing out my 6th year now. But the high school is about 1,200 students, and now it's at 1,400 students. There's a bubble going through, and it still has a couple, 3 years to go. So you have 200 more students, more student needs. So the high school principal felt a big need for .3 guidance to help service those students and the materials that are necessary for additional students. The cost share for the top program has been a great partnership with Andover. We partnered with them through a grant that provided the startup costs, and what happens is we are responsible for special education students till 23?
22.
22, once they hit 23.
Yeah.
Right. And so once they finish high school, they need something to do as a vocational program that helps them get jobs in the area and how, teaches them job skills. And the program's been tremendously successful. And we have even more now that are going, instead of going out, that could be an out-of-district placement if we didn't have this program. So it's saved us a lot of money. But because it's successful, we've got more students going, and we need to add a teacher and an additional van that transports them. And those are shared costs with Andover. That's why it shows up as $63,000. And doesn't show up as an FTE because they're actually on their books, so they don't have to pay for the benefit costs either. Elementary self-contained social emotional program. A few years ago, we had a group called the Walker Group come in and assess our special education department and service delivery and made a lot of recommendations, and we've been over the years implementing those recommendations, and this continues to do that. And again, it's similar to the top program in that if we have it in district, it's going to save us money, and it's better for the student if we can provide it rather than sending them out. And then the elementary computers, we have been able to get our staff computers, our high school and middle school. We're still working on middle school through some different funding. But the elementary, we're going to use the funding this year to create carts that can be used in the elementary schools. You had a question, Karen?
Yeah, thank you. I do. I just wanted to get back to this level 1.
Mm-hmm.
There's a measure you want to see improved student achievement to get to level 1. Which students' achievements are weighted the most? Did I hear you say it's the ones with these very heavy special?
No. There's a points system, all right, that the state comes up with, all right? And every student that is proficient or advanced gets the full amount of points. If you're lower than that, you get less points. You also have where are your special needs groups occurring? It's just not special education. It's ELL students as well. So you're looking at the state labels them high risk or high need students. And you, therefore, for how those groups perform, you also get point values for how they've performed. When you look at, and the bottom line is, I hate to talk about students in terms of points, but our goal, if you really want to be level 1, you really want to narrow the achievement gap. Now that was why NCLB had their label. No Child Left Behind. Eliminate the achievement gap. Well, guess what? And everybody's found that to be pretty difficult. So we're simply saying it's not that you're not paying attention to every child, but if we try to improve our performance on the high needs or high risk area students, all right, that will contribute very positively to getting to that level 1.
To getting to level 1.
Getting to level 1.
High needs learners aren't necessarily and categorically simply special needs. It is a bigger group.
No, special needs is ELL, and then there's free reduced lunch.
Yeah.
All right,
So then it's between special needs, the high needs learners, and the special education, there's a very large component
yes.
of our budget,
Oh,
which is
yeah.
devoted to that and driven by it, as I can see here.
Yes.
Because those top, can we go back to that other thing? All right, so we were going to pick up two FTEs for the emotional program,
Yep, 1 teacher, 1 paraprofessional. Yep.
fully loaded. employees?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Union?
Yes.
Both are unions, yeah.
Uh,
All our employees are union except administrators.
all right. Back up on the line that says education materials. It looks like it's just materials, but it really can't be.
It's not,
For
it's the
$54,000.
point free guidance counselor.
Yep.
And then it's materials for various science, social studies, and there was one other, right?
When you have the bubble classes coming through the high school,
Yeah.
and high school text resources are typically much more expensive than any other level. And so when you have those bubble classes, you have to, for instance, just look at biology. Every single freshman takes biology. So you have a bubble class coming through, you need those biology resources for the freshmen. That's what they need to replenish those.
These
For
are
the for the
textbooks.
bubble that's occurring. Some of them are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of them are, and it's for those bubble classes that are coming through, and then you're getting 2 more coming up as well. And next year, well, this coming year, and then 2 years after that.
So of the 54,000 on that line, part of it is for the .3
Three.
FTE,
Right.
and the rest of it is to purchase
Materials, yeah.
these.
I'd say 18,000.
Yeah, 18 or 20, somewhere in there, yeah.
And the computer replacement for K through 5, as you said, yeah, you're going to be shifting to some sort of mobile.
Yes, it allows, what we've done in the last couple of years is we've switched from Macs to Chromebooks. You get almost 4 Chromebooks for every Mac you would have gotten. So it's going to allow us to get a lot more units in the classrooms than we have in the past. But yeah, we'll be able to do at least a couple of carts per elementary school, and 3 or 4 in some of the big ones.
And so the Chromebooks are.
They do everything we would need them
Puppies.
to do at an
Oh,
elementary
yeah.
school. Yep.
Okay. And-
Everybody's finding it to be
Yeah.
very, very useful.
Really? And they
Well,
don't
really,
take them
and
home,
by the
right?
time they
No,
get to high
no.
school, they're not
Okay,
gonna
they
use
stay
Mac.
in school.
Right.
The Mac in the
Yeah,
real
right.
world uses Mac.
Right, that way, every teacher has access to them. They don't stay in one classroom. You roll them in when you are going to do a lesson that you need the unit for.
So, all right, thank you.
Mhm. This is just a summary with some history of the different, we break them up into programs. You have this, the detail of the budgets by program, by account number. And just a summary, we have, for salary increases, we have been able to mirror through our negotiations pretty much, I can't think of an exception, the municipal contracts. So for this coming year, increases will be 2.25%. The only difference being that I believe the municipal side is going to do 2 to start and then 2.5 halfway through.
Yeah.
Yep. Whereas ours is just going to be 2.25 from the start. And then next year, 2.0% is what's in the contracts, just like on the municipal side. Stabilization fund, as I said, would allow us to use the funds like the 280 for newer initiatives rather than special education contingency, which is where it would have gone, as well as the new administration building opening, giving us that lease available. And then enrollment projections continue to indicate trend is level growth and even maybe a little bit down. So, Hutch is going to talk about the different aspects of the budget.
Well, at this point in time, some of it's a little, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I did have one question here. It's back, and, oh dear. Has to do with. And I'm just gonna sort of summarize this in a way that really probably doesn't reflect the right vocabulary, but for fiscal 16, you budgeted for for level services. So, in other words, you didn't increase your services and you didn't diminish your services to start with. But
To begin with.
To begin with.
Correct.
So you started with that. And that was 3%.
Correct.
And then you added to that 3% a 5% factor,
0.5%.
excuse me, a 0.5%.
Mhm.
The points are very important, for other things
Mhm.
that you would look at later. And that was about 32 million, what was that? 210,000.
210.
210.
Correct.
Okay, about 210. And then you add to that the money that it looks like you saved in utilities from the ESCO
Right, and lease.
and the lease.
Yep.
Okay, so this is how the ESCO savings gets into the school budget and stays there. And the savings from the lease also, that came out of the general fund.
Comes out of the.
But will not
So
go
the lease
back
payment
into
used to
the
be made by
general
the school
fund.
department now.
Well, it's
Right.
always been made by the school department.
Yeah.
Right, and now.
We just don't have to
doesn't
make that payment anymore.
Right.
You don't have to make the payment anymore, so, but that basically
And
stays
things like
in
that,
there.
right, things like that happen every year where,
Right.
for instance, one year we had to buy a truck and the next year we didn't. So we had 35,000 in the budget the year before, and now it can be reallocated for something else the following year.
For
Yep.
for 1 year. And so then when you add all of those little extras up, the 0.5%, the lease savings, the
Utility,
ESCO
yep.
savings, utility savings, then you subtract from that your
Anticipated out of district.
your anticipated out-of-district costs.
Mhm.
This gives you your little nugget that-
Correct.
of 300 and something thousand that you could then spread around to your other programs. Some of your programs then are no longer level service, they may go up.
Correct.
So that 310 or whatever it is, basically is the great unleveler when you go back, depending on your departments. So one department might go down like maintenance, and the others then sort of take up that
Correct.
slack. So it's reallocated. And I suppose those reallocations then will be reflected in the line items next year.
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
I got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I will
Thank you,
say
that was
that.
enlightening.
Before I
Anytime,
say-
right.
I will say that we continue as a leadership team to look at possibilities where we could continue to be more efficient, save money, make some cuts. Because when you look at I don't know if you had a chance yet to look at the wording of the superintendent's proposal for the stabilization fund, there's a maximum amount that's being proposed that could be drawn from any 1 year. So if we've got more than that, we're still going to need to have a contingency within our own budget for unanticipated out-of-district costs. So what we're trying to do is build that contingency before the year starts. So we're always looking at ways that we might be able to save some money, put it aside in the contingency to cover that.
So if we add the $750,000 to the 3.5%, what is that? 750,000 divided by, what does that get us?
Well, 3.5 was
About
1.4.
1.7, 1.8%, so
3.5 was 1.4 million, so 750 is half of that, so 1.75.
okay, 1.75, so then we go from 3.5, and then we add 1.75,
Yeah, but that's not,
and that is kind of like,
that's not what's happening now.
No, this is.
Where it's a stabilization fund, can only be used for,
well, I understand, but
Right.
the impact is, that you're asking the town to come up with, yeah, what's the sum of that? I can't add.
well, when you get the 1.4 up in the 750, 2.15.
Well, aren't you around 5% then overall that you're asking the town to? Come
You
up
can
with-
look, you can look at it that way. I wouldn't.
Well, I'm just thinking that way.
It's not that that money is for the school department budget. It's
Oh, no, it's limited in how you use it.
very limited, right. It's only for that purpose.
But
And
the overall-
ideally,
Yeah.
and should probably share this, I forgot to say this. I've talked to the town manager. My goal is to, in the next 3 or 4 years, not even need to have that stabilization fund. I'm gonna try to use circuit breaker in that regard. We get the reimbursement the following year. Right now, we budgeted 100%, we build it into our budget. If, over the next couple of years, we're able to minimize or reduce the need of that, so that we are only budgeting, let's say, $1 million, but we're getting 1.6 million, then we've got it built in already. We know that money's coming in the following year, and we have a built-in contingency. So that's the
Well,
goal.
that was my next question, if we'd see any of that circuit breaker going in there.
That's
So-
the goal.
Great, okay.
Okay.
I had a question too, like a couple things, and maybe, Dr. Hutchinson, you can address this in thing, but I noticed 2 things that were kind of interesting. One is that Title I funds are up, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they're directly tied to kind of the social economic status.
Free and
of-
reduced.
And
Free and
the
reduced funds.
current, and the census as reported, I think, the previous year.
It's gone up, since I've been here, it's gone from 5% to almost 15, 14 point something percent.
And and Title I's broken down into 3 categories. And once you go over the 5% as far as the population need, it bumps up. There's been some years we've had 1/3 of that.
Right. So
And
it's not.
you never know until the
Right.
beginning of July.
It's not a linear curve.
No.
It's not a straight algebraic
Not at
equation.
all.
It's
Not at all.
quadratic. I'm not gonna go any further than math. But, okay, so, and then the other thing I was noticing was that, you know, as you look at, and I guess in a sense, that just says something about, you know, the demographics of our school. It also says something about macroeconomics and what's happened, you know, throughout the past few years. So that's one thing I was thinking that might be a new set of challenges. And then the other thing I noticed was that the charter school reimbursements are up a little bit, and I know, and that just seems to me like, gotta look out, it seems to me, you always want to be looking out for that's it now at about 78,000, which is, you know, say a teacher in a little bit, which is.
Yeah,
not
we
that
noticed
big.
too, that's not linear either. That's very cyclical.
Yeah, it's up and
Yeah.
down, you
Yeah.
never know.
Two things. One, I would definitely piggyback on the surprise factor when people find out what proportion of our students qualify for Title I. The assumption is that's a small amount, and that number is significant, and that factors all the way through, not just in terms of expense, but as you say, in terms of risk factors, all those sort of things.
Can I just add, the other part it impacts is our revolving account revenue. Because free and reduced students are eligible for free, you know, they don't have to pay athletic fees or transportation. So the higher that percentage goes up, the lower our revenue becomes in the revolving accounts as well. So it has an impact on the whole budget.
Yeah, and that's just a factor, again, people don't realize that that's got to be bore by the rest of the budget in some fashion. So that's sort of one. The other, geez, I just lost it.
The other thing you should know about Title I is Title I funds only can be used in designated Title I schools. And right now, it's Atkinson and Thompson, they always have been. And there's some portion of funds now used for the middle school as well. And we can't supplant, we have to supplant. Therefore, all the funds are used for additional staffing typically in those schools. That is unlike any of the other schools.
You mentioned charter schools really briefly. Is that out of district? Is that where that falls into? I didn't.
They're in Lawrence.
What the vocational school?
Oh, the vocational
No, I meant
school.
that.
Charter
Charter
school is,
school.
there's a charter school in, it's an elementary charter school in
It's not a big number, but.
in
Okay.
Lawrence that I
It's not
believe
a
most of
whole-
the students go to. I think it's
Like a
6 or
big
7
jump amount
students.
to level
That's it.
Okay,
Yeah.
and that goes into out-of-district costs, that's
Yep.
part of that
They
other
have it
out-of-district?
online.
No.
In your-
Yes,
Indirect
it's online.
cost sheet.
It's a
Okay,
state
I missed that
assessment.
someplace,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So the other thing that we've seen historically, would be nice to have somewhere, is that chart, and I remember in years past, about the proportion of students that stick, for lack of a better term, middle school to high school, okay?
Yep.
And you know, that number, of course, got impacted by economics 7, 8 years ago. I'd like to think a lot of that has to do with how we performed as a district, but that the economics was an accelerator. To me, that's also a measure. That's people voting with their feet. And to me, that would be another measure of how we're doing, which is how many children choose to stay, how many parents choose to have their children not go to the private options around us. And, you know, potentially, I would say, you know, maybe there's a goal there for us as a community. It's a right fit, you know, obviously you want your children to fit, but given what we offer, it seems to me we should have some aspirational target for that. And again, I think that's a good measure that the community can get behind. It would be nice, certainly on a comparative basis, to say, hey, our district really accommodates whatever, 85, 82, 93%, whatever that number is. I think that has some power too.
Yeah, and while we don't show it in our presentations, we did, as Chris was saying, when the economy was going poorly, we did see less students going to other schools. More were staying with us. And we continue to monitor that, but in all honesty, even though the economy has improved, that's pretty leveled off, right, where it kind of got to a small number and it's level. So for the time being, we're not showing it because it's level. But if that changes, we would probably include it again. And I guess you could interpret that as a positive in that even though the economy is improving, students aren't now saying, okay, well, I can afford to go somewhere else, I'm going. They're staying with us. Okay.
I was going to follow that up.
Well, actually, I might actually take the discussion a little bit more off balance right now. But I have a Andrew and Lynn knows I'm very much looking to benchmark numbers and trying to get always a gauge, you know, how good. You know, we spent $43 million, and you know, I broke it down, for example, per student, roughly $9,000.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you take the 2010 census data, like $1,500 per, you know, how you say, people living here, you know,
Yeah,
$1,500 per
per
head, per capita is,
Yep.
right? So if I look at, and did we ever look at, let's say, towns with a similar spending, 9,000
We
per
do,
student?
yeah, and interestingly enough, ours is just over 9,000.
Yeah.
The state average is just over 11,000 per student. And we have comparables that we do with towns that people are familiar with and would expect you to compare yourself to, but aren't necessarily the ones you should be comparing to. The state does an excellent job of providing us with a list of very similar communities. And we're able to go in and look at ourselves compared to those. And we fare well with regards to our college, you know, our going to four-year schools, our testing, and we're low on our cost per student. So we're getting more for our money than most communities.
That was exactly my point, you know. Is there a way you can, you know, measure, you know, the level one or whatever it is, a metric where you say, hey, for our $9,000, we get actually a lot more than most of the other students, or not, you know. I don't know, so I would
That's
be
in the back
interested
of
in
the-
that type of,
They have a whole chart in the back of the budget.
The budget presentation, it's got the dark district comparisons.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw that, Thomas.
oh, yeah, that is.
It's at the very end, very near the end of the one that was online, the budget presentation.
The budget presentation?
Yeah, not the,
Oh, yeah.
the one that had it around all four.
Okay.
Yeah. We have our
So when we look at that
Per
page,
pupil expenditures are
Perfect.
right there.
Yeah.
We have students per teacher, average teacher salaries, that.
so what page is it? So how does
It's kind of hard to
It's
look
section
at.
E, page 1, I think.
We just got right in the very
If you go all the way to the back of the budget, though,
Probably 5 in
like
from the very
almost,
back.
yeah, 5 in from the back, yeah, into these
There
metrics,
you
right
go,
there.
right there.
That's what you're looking for.
So there's no, okay. I don't know, a lot of numbers.
We moved here 6 years ago, I remember looking at all this.
So you're welcome to take a look, and if you have any questions, you can email me.
All right, but it doesn't really tell me, you know.
It doesn't
the
tell you
metrics, the
performance, et cetera.
metrics,
So we
right?
have that.
We have that as well.
We have that as well, and by the way,
There's
Shrewsbury is the top district as far as performing is concerned, in this dark comparison. I look at Shrewsbury's, from what I know of it, a different type of community, but it can't be based on how they, the formula that they use, but they are the top performing district of all these districts. And we've had some conversations with their leadership team. I'd say there's something worth looking even further in coming years of sending a team there and saying, okay, this is the results we're getting, this is what we're doing, what are you doing, and why, and you're getting better results. Who knows what it might be, but it's worth looking at. We have the student performance results to go along with this data as well.
It's really interesting too, because their students
Yeah, it is.
per teacher are actually some of the highest. You know, they have
Yeah.
17.6 students to one teacher.
Yeah.
You'll drive
And
yourself
yet-
crazy trying to figure
Oh,
out.
I know.
Yeah, you do,
What
you
it
really
is,
do.
yeah.
It's
What's the
it's so
magic?
hard to put your finger on, there's no
Yeah.
magic.
Because
Oh, yeah.
Shrewsbury's probably looking at somebody else and saying, how can we do it like them?
Yeah. Oh, no,
Yep.
I understand.
One thing they do, they have an early childhood center that includes first grade as well, and all of kindergarten together. I mean, they do different things. And for instance, would that make sense here? Well, if that's what they're putting their finger at, we should be looking at something, I'm not saying it is. Okay, could we replicate that here? You know, maybe, maybe not. It all depends. The state has a lot of great data, so.
Not everything shows up in the budget.
Right.
One thing we're doing is working with Merrimack College, and we have, actually, the town has a fellow as well, but ours is working on improving parental involvement at the Title I schools that we have, because that has an impact on those students.
Absolutely.
Yep. Okay, now.
Well, we've pretty much covered everything. I'll just show, the next slide, the purpose of this, just show you when we do the budget presentation, we categorize it. So the first category, we use teaching positions and class size, because that addresses the school committee directives. So when we talk about the impact of bubble classes, we may have a difference from one grade level to another of 70 students. Now, typically, you would say that's 2 to 3 more classes. Those are what we call bubble classes. We usually aren't that extreme. Sometimes it happens. When we talk about student committee goals, we talk about ideally we want class size 18 to 22, K to 2. Does that exist now? No, in some classes it does, in some classes it doesn't. When we have the pressure points of grades, it's simply the elementary is a puzzle to solve every year. Kindergarten, we're never sure exactly how many we will have in kindergarten until they come and if they register on time. Right now, we're behind where we were last year. So we just can't say, okay, we're going to have this many kindergartens. And that, we can't typically make that decision until sometime in May. And we basically say how we're going to shift any classes around across all the elementary schools, which means sometimes we have to say, we're shutting off this kindergarten at Franklin, and anybody new has to go somewhere else. We've done that for years. Last year, it became a little more of a boiling point for some. And as a result, we do spotty redistricting, which means the school committee has a policy where the superintendent can redistrict kids from certain neighborhoods if there's pressure points in schools. That happens all the time. And typically, once we're at second grade, we know we can project what's going to happen. But first, kindergarten and first grade, because a lot of times there's more students coming back from kindergarten outside first grade. We're totally not, we're not sure right now. We will be sure by the end of June, or actually by September, what the impact of free full-day kindergarten was. And based on that, now, after a short year, people are used to it. It looks like we're going to fall into some set patterns now. We can only hope for that. And I think we should be able to find that out pretty quickly. And as far as for teaching position and class size, we always look at, okay, now, what can we do to sustain continuity at grade levels and teacher teams? And that does have the impact on Chapter 1, on Level 1, simply because we're looking at teaching practice and improving teaching practice. So a lot of the other conversation we've had tonight really connects to these points.
Well,
Yeah,
if I could
yeah.
just interject, I
Yeah,
think,
Chris, yeah.
and I absolutely appreciate and have literally sat through the redistricting experience and
right.
the puzzle, redistricting my own children. But I do think it's important, I mean, these are our goals in terms of class sizes, but I think in recognition of transparency, the fact that we aren't hitting them, and the real factors are not.
Right.
But I think the fact that we're not, or what that really is, I think by keeping that a little more visible, potentially puts the school district in a better position, so that when you come up with that list next year and the year after and the year after for these initiatives that address the fact that, well, why do we need another teacher in the 6th grade, or why do we need another reading teacher? Well, it's because we have 29 children in our 5th grade classes. That's a little large, and we can, polish and strengthen those kids, because maybe they didn't put quite as much time as we would have liked. Now we can help them coming into the elementary school. And I'm just taking a scenario forward. To me, the more that you can have those numbers visible, the more you set the table for really not just your needs, but also where your performance factors are.
There's also a reality factor, unfortunately. There's a reality factor. If we had every K-2 classroom, 18 to 22, we wouldn't have enough space.
Yeah.
We just wouldn't have enough space. If we knew we were growing at leaps and bounds, we'd be a different approach, but it doesn't look like we're doing that. So we have to be, when we look at, was it 2 years out to look at some small buildings or replacement of classrooms.
Right,
That-
there's a project
we have to look at that, because right now Sargent is the largest school. It can sustain 3 grades at every level. Actually, it can sustain 4 grades at 4 classrooms at every level. It's the only school that can. Franklin cannot do that. So you're going to have some with 3 and some with 4. But you can't have all 4s going through. So that makes the puzzle every year. We might find it interesting, but we also know we want to do what has the least impact on families about moving their students, et cetera. But the reality is, districts, the districting has been set. You can make an argument that some students can walk to Sargent, yet they're bused to Franklin. And those are where we begin to make some shifts where, no, you have to go there instead of there. We're busing, I think, 2 busloads of students or at least one. We have 1 dedicated bus, elementary, from Royal Crest to Sargent School now, because they can absorb the larger size, because there's been an influx of numbers at Royal Crest, and Atkinson can't take those students.
No, and
So
I'm not
it's-
looking at it from a solving standpoint,
Yeah.
absolutely not, but I do think that keeps that out there also for when that day comes, and I am an absolute believer that that day is gonna come. 2 years, 5 years, 7 years from now, and all of a sudden, boom, that bubble's gonna hit across the board. It's gonna happen. And I think by having some of this more transparent, saying, we're doing all these things as a district, we think we're doing them right, we're continuing to look at it so that when that pressure point hits, we're in a better position as a community to look at than what you have to come to us, because that's gonna be a factor in a way that it's not just sort of the what we're
Well,
doing.
for instance, it's one of those pressure points. When you look at, the town built the ECC. That's 10 classrooms that would have been being used for the ECC in other schools. That freed up 10 classrooms. That's pretty amazing. That building was put up like that, and we still have ECC, early childhood centers visiting ours, because that's a building to be proud of. You were on the school committee then, right? So, and that was pretty short order.
I have
Yep.
you mentioned earlier, and this is slightly off point, but I
Sure.
want to make sure I understand this. You mentioned earlier that Title I funds could only be spent at Title I schools.
Yep.
Now, Royal Crest, the population that comes in there, do you have a lower income population in there?
It's mixed.
It's
Yeah,
mixed,
yeah.
okay, so, but they all end up going to Sargent, so.
Not all of them.
how-
Not all of them.
Okay, so do you take students that are Title I students and put them at Title I schools?
It's
or-
not, the city's
No,
not based on.
yeah.
Okay, it's not based on that at all?
No.
No.
Okay, so I guess I'm.
Title
how
I
is
schools
Title I
get
money-
designated simply because they have a larger
Percentage,
of
okay.
free and reduced lunch students.
I see, okay. But you can only spend Title I money at those schools?
Yes.
Interesting, okay.
But Sargent could become a Title I school.
If the
It could,
percentage
sure, it
bumps
could,
up
yeah.
enough, I see.
It's pretty small.
I see, okay.
Sorry, it's pretty small.
I see.
The next one is performance initiatives. When we're looking at, I think this showed up on one of the line items. I'm not sure the difference between why there was a little bubble somewhere at central office. Curriculum and leadership support. Last year, we did a movement that was cost neutral. We created 2 K-12 curriculum coordinators, right? Our main office is pretty lean as far as curriculum support is concerned. Typically, it was just simply the assistant superintendent did it all right? I was in that position now. Greg Gilligan's in that position. What we did was we eliminated, over 2 years, we eliminated all the department chairs at the high school. And we dedicated those funds to now a K-12 support. We also then put in facilitators of collaborative inquiry, we call them. Those of you in the education field they use the term PLC, professional learning communities. We don't use that term, but we focus on high degrees of collaboration, and we have about 25 facilitators now that we've trained, which all the work they're doing is curriculum work and curriculum leadership work, teaching and learning work. And the 2 K-12 coordinators have made a huge impact on how that's done across the entire district now, just not at the high school. The high school went along with the model change. They have facilitators that used to be in the areas where we used to have curriculum department heads. And it's different if you're familiar with the high school model. But last year our theme was more about equity, and so those were some changes that were made. We're seeing some really positive results in PD across the elementary now, the consistency of the PD because of these positions. And they've, although they were both former high school people, they've taken a great leadership role in the elementary level. The literacy model, we've changed a bit. 3 years ago, we had about $150,000, $200,000 more dollars that we were dedicated towards literacy. When we hit some budget shortages, we made some drastic cuts there. Our model has also changed, and it's really about, we're throwing around these education terms, but if you talk about what we talk about, the RTI model, response to intervention model, it's out there. And all school districts talk about this, and it has a really good theory. You think of a triangle with 3 tiers. The bottom triangle typically is about 80 to 90% of the students will learn based on good classroom instruction, right? The second tier is there's some students, about 15 to 20% of the students, will need additional time and support for learning. Makes total sense. If you're not learning in the time that you're dedicated within a class, you need additional time and support. Sometimes that can occur within the class, but that means about 15 to 20%. That's called the intervention model within there. And then you'll have about, it should be about 3 to 5% in the top tier, which means long-term intervention. Typically, that's where special education students will fall to, where you need long-term intervention. And what we've changed our literacy model to do is, it used to be totally about intervention. Now we're shifting towards more about impacting the classroom. We still haven't completed our first year of it, but we've hired literacy coaches, and their main focus is not to perform interventions with students. The main focus is to impact and coach classroom practice. You'd like to say, where would you get your biggest bang for your buck of improving? It's improving classroom practice. It's not saying classroom practice is bad, but as professionals, the only thing you can do is improve. And we want to make sure we have strong literacy coaches to help support the schools. I'd love to have more, but right now we only have 2. It didn't make the green lines. It came pretty close, but it didn't make the green lines. But we're still tuning that model as well. And we've done with those teachers and with another reading specialist, we've done some piloting of intervention programs too, to see how could we be more efficient and effective in the interventions that we're doing in the elementary school compared to what we had done in the past. What we have initially seen is, when we did away with that for a year, we didn't see any substantial drop in the 3rd grade scores. All right, 3rd grade scores. Bottom goal is we would hope to have 92 to 95% of the students proficient by the end of grade 3 in reading as compared on the MCAS test. Right now, we're up to 70. It's been fluctuating a little below that and up to 70. I'll give you an example, Andover 75, right? And what we're trying to do is get that level up by the end of grade 3. Now, we're going to need a number of years to see how we're going to do on that, but I think we've shifted the model a bit. And we just have to, again, we're looking at better and better measurements. We found a pretty good measurement tool program yesterday. Not yesterday, but we had a presentation yesterday. We've been looking at it for 2 years. And we had another presentation on it yesterday. So that's one of the things we're doing with monies we have, but we're using them differently. We've refocused them. Yes?
So the literacy coaches, for
Yeah.
example, what you're saying is that they're focusing at the bottom of that pyramid?
Yeah.
Because that's where they can have the most impact, because the bulk of...
That's where you should have
the most
biggest impact.
Right. Okay,
Right.
but as you go up that pyramid, that's where your high-need
You
learners
have
are.
more specialists, yeah, you have more
Right.
specialists involved, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so the literacy coaches are working at a level to try to just
The literacy, yeah.
increase the overall classroom environment for
But also,
literacy?
literacy coaches also impact what happens in level 2, because a
In
lot of the
level
level
two,
2
right.
interventions can happen in the classroom.
In
How
the-
you run your
okay.
classroom to allow for a smaller group support.
I see what you mean.
Because some students that are getting it right away can work more individually on their skills, and then you have some time
I see
freed
what
up
you mean.
to work
As
with
opposed
smaller
to
groups.
pull-out services where you're taking kids out and doing
yeah.
one-on-one tutoring.
Yeah,
I
we're
see.
also looking, well, it's not part of this, well, it's connected with special education programs, our scheduling in the elementary school. How do we schedule the elementary school intervention blocks? If you can schedule them first, and everybody knows you have to work around those, then you can probably provide special education, ELL, and reading services if there's some intervention involved during those times, so it's more efficient. And then you become more efficient with how you deliver special education services throughout the day after that as well. So, but then you need 5 schools on the same page, and there's 5 different sizes. So it's nice to say every school gets one intervention specialist, which used to happen.
Right.
But when one school is twice the size of the other, you're just scratching your head saying, this doesn't make any sense. So we've been redoing that. So it's the exciting part, but it does, you don't see the impact immediately. We also, well, I already talked about curriculum and instruction leadership when I started talking about curriculum instruction connections before. Jim mentioned how we're trying to absolutely connect our strategic plan with time-wise as well, with our budgeting process. So it's really critical that when we take our initiatives for this year, and we do the performance measurements on those, that's absolutely critical to be able to create that shift into a real performance-based budgeting process. And I wish, I'd love to be here to see it come to more fruition, but I'll just be watching. So, but I think the steps we've been taking in that regard have been very, very, very directive and moving in the right direction. It can only get better. I guess I've been mixing up everything here. Moving on to literacy model. When I had the literacy model, I just talked about it, and then it's I already explained all of that. I could go into hours on this because this is fun stuff, but yeah, I won't. All right. Special education. This is another piece. It's pretty close to what happens in K-1. There's fluctuations that occur in special education all the time, and by the end of June we will know the true caseload numbers. You can't because they're always coming up. There's IEP meetings all year long. So, and some of them are for new IEPs, and that's why we have a budget, but we can make shifts within that simply depending upon where the numbers of students are. We have a situation in one school now. It looks like we'll be able to shift one teacher out, but use that teacher somewhere else because the caseloads are coming down in that particular school, where in other schools there's a further need. You just don't know that until right towards the end of the year, because that's when everything solidifies. But then again, you can get surprises right away. So, and that's where the contingency funding, I've had plenty of conversations with other superintendents, and they really are talking $750 to $1 million some years. We have to do what we can do to create our own cushion from within. But if you had to build that into your budget, you'd have to cut so many things. Yet you want to do everything you possibly can not to use it, and that's where we need to create better efficiencies in what we're doing as well. But also, Jim mentioned that Walker report. A big part of that Walker report is we did not have continuity programs from one level to another, and that actually increases your cost typically, because if somebody's, if a student's aging out at the 5th grade and going into 6th, and you don't have that program in place at the 6th grade, you can rest assured that that family is going to be looking for outplacement, and there's good reasons for why they should have it, because we don't have programming in place. And so we've really increased our continuity of programs over the last couple of years, and you just sometimes with certain populations you just have to. 1 or 2 more students in a significantly medically fragile program is a huge shift of personnel, and it's just what it is.
Isn't there also, the other, I think, reason why that was a significant step is you're also in a bit of a catch-22, which is as you build the program, there's more appeal to your community, so you have the potential for attracting folks because of the quality of the program. So you've got that little bit of factor, and I think that's the other reason why you chose to try and invest in district, to try and create more in district, because you are more susceptible to somebody saying, we've got a choice to make and you have to move. Why wouldn't you choose a good community?
One thing we find when we network, go to meetings, conferences, every school district thinks that theirs is the one that's being singled out. So people are saying them.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I guess we're on to technology, and I know we've talked a lot about that as well. And we have made Mike Grant is our technology director. He's we shifted Mike into that position a year ago, January. We've made significant improvements as far as our infrastructure is concerned. And right now we are behind. Definitely we are behind. The infrastructure is totally in place. Where we are behind now is really the computers. Yet that is changing like crazy. That is changing like crazy. And every time we think we have a set plan, all of a sudden something new comes along. That's the way it is. So we are definitely looking to have an impact next year with the elementary schools, as Jim's talked about. And the middle school has been doing it from within. And the high school will be doing some one-on-one initiatives. The high school, you know, if you could, 2 years ago, we were set, yep, purchase computers for, purchase the rent or lease to purchase programs at the high school, and those are falling away now, simply because everybody can, you know, can pull out a device and use it for, yet you need certain levels of computer capability, full computer capability as well. And so that's where we'll be making a lot of decisions next year regarding where we're going to go with that. But this year, the decision was to booster up at the elementary levels. So if we had, if somebody gave us $1 million, we know where we'd spend it. So. And this, Jim's your summary of...
This is just, yeah, and Karen, you already pointed out the change in staffing. You can see, for the most part, it's consistent, an additional paraprofessional, 2.3 additional teachers, and that's pretty much it.
So this is the head count.
Yes, for the different categories.
Oh,
Yep.
and where do we have this? Is it here someplace?
I might have added this one
Yeah.
after you received the presentation. I think I added this one.
Oh, okay, can we?
Right, I have that presentation actually.
I did say, yeah, I sent it
Sent it to
earlier.
me
When I
today.
finished the final draft, I sent it to Bill.
Okay.
So I'll send it out again.
Head count, yeah, great. Okay, wonderful. So we have a lot of nurses.
No, you wouldn't want to tell them that. Our per student ratio is very high for nursing. Compared to other districts, we would have more if we had the same per nurse to student ratio.
You're looking at 8 schools essentially when you count the ECC separately. So you're looking at 8 schools.
We have one nurse at the high school.
We have one nurse at high school.
1,400 students.
Yeah. And the
This
needs
includes-
have increased in nursing, by the
Right.
way. Needs have increased over the years.
Because of?
It would be very interesting that if you hear, we can actually send it to you, her last year's presentation, Cheryl Barzak, our lead nurse, about the numbers of students. They keep really great stats. They have to. The numbers of students, office visits per day, medications per day. The
Medication, just an example, the allergies, the number of
allergies
students that have
increased.
allergies.
Yeah. The number of
they have to
EpiPens
address.
alone
Yeah.
that are in nurses' offices are amazing. So they would argue, and according to the state, we're below what the state recommends, but typically everybody is below what the state recommends in everything, so.
I see.
So, we've talked about all this. These are the highlights. We've got the 6th grade teacher, the top program, which is the 18 to 22-year-olds, the special education program at the elementary level, the high school guidance and educational materials, the elementary computers, and the stabilization fund. Those are the highlights of our budget. That's it.
You raised a flag relative to kindergarten and what the state might be doing. Does that affect us with the full-time kindergarten move that we made?
Yes.
We're talking about the grant, the elimination.
Sure.
Eliminated.
Whether we
What
did
about-
that move or not.
What about we went as a town to a full day kindergarten initiatives began last
Yeah,
year?
but that's chapter 70, that's.
It's different money.
Right.
Different money.
Yes.
Different source of money. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, that, in this grant, it was 130-something thousand. It's going, well, it went down to 105 this year. It was already going down, and now it could be 0. So, yeah.
Jim, would that be 0 for this year, and then after they get finished filling this budget hole at the state level, and then come back next year?
That, you never know.
That's one of the ones.
Usually
that
when it goes
projected
away,
For
it doesn't come back.
Which means that would be $135,000 less that we have, that we'd be counting on. So That's, we've done a survey of districts across the state about, for instance, how they use staffing in the elementary school. So for instance, in kindergarten programs, right now, we have, for every classroom, there's also a full-time paraprofessional as well as a full-time teacher. That's the only place it exists. That doesn't exist in any other grade level. You could argue very strongly that there's a good reason for that. Yet, why we had a lot of the support that we have is because we had the kindergarten grants as well.
So that's an example of, when I was saying earlier, how we're still looking for opportunities. That particular one is in response to the loss of that grant. So is it, when we look at other districts and how many paras they have for kindergarten, is there another model that we can use that might be able to allow us to reduce the number of paras, and then we wouldn't feel the impact of that loss?
Is this basically, in broad brush, an unfunding of a funded mandate?
Pretty much.
Pretty much.
But somewhat self-inflicted in that other districts didn't go to the model of one para for every classroom, where we did. So it's somewhat self-inflicted.
And when you say it's projected to zero, you mean in the state budget? The state
Yes.
budget now is projected to zero in...
They're projecting eliminating that grant.
Just completely.
Now, the purpose of that grant was to help school districts move to full-day
full-time kindergarten, right.
We were fortunate enough to do that.
Yes.
So that grant was just a little bit of extra. That was nice to support what we're doing in kindergarten. Now that we've moved, we get the financial benefit of declaring those students full-time students.
Yes.
In the past, they were only half-time students. So we've made that jump. I'd hate to be a community that was using that money all along, but never made the move to free full-day kindergarten.
So this one, by putting the students so-called on the roll,
Yeah.
we shift into the revenue sharing formula,
Yeah.
the school formula.
Sure.
And that's where we get our
Yeah.
bump in money.
There's just one other thing I wanted to show you, and maybe figure out how to make this more visible, but this just reflects the enrollment projection model that we're using. And the color going across, you can see that's one group of students from kindergarten as they move their way to graduation. And what we look at is the transition from kindergarten to first grade. What is the average increase? And we anticipate that being smaller now that we have free full-day kindergarten than it was in the past. We anticipate most students going to our kindergarten. And then the transition from 5th to 6th and 8 to 9. We look at those as the big transition years, but we can be very accurate in our projections, with the one most difficult part being how many kindergarten students do we have, and trying to predict that number. So that's what we're working on right now, and we believe once we get that, we'll have a very accurate model. But I just want to show, if you look at 95 to 2004, these are births, number of births in North Andover. And the average, you can see there, is 331 for that period of time, whereas over the last, about the same number of years, it's 285, so that's 46
Yes, but you may
students.
have a bump this year.
Yeah. You might, right, but
Storm bump.
it's just,
From a long time ago.
5 years.
it's the reason we're saying we don't anticipate, a growth spurt coming.
Well, to give Karen credit for that, it's a trademark term, right? Have a blizzard bump.
Now, do you also factor in new developments, like new building and how do you,
Yeah,
you know, I
it's
mean, that's
interesting.
probably a little easier to.
I went to a session on building this enrollment projection model, and surprisingly, you don't have to, because you're talking about 13 grades, you don't expect a big impact from a development. You can monitor it, but you don't have to change your model much to see what happens.
Yeah, because you're not gonna have all first graders moving.
That's
right. Exactly.
Right, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Any other questions?
I have a quick question about the utility savings. I know when we originally met, the very first meeting, when they talked about the ESCO, one of the things they said was, and I may not be phrasing this exactly correctly, but we negotiate our rates. And, you know, I know that for the average consumer right now, rates have gone through the ceiling in terms of gas and electric. But we haven't been horribly impacted by that because as a town, we negotiate, or as a region, I think, part of a regional consortium.
Yeah.
We negotiate, right, we negotiate our rates, but that's gonna change at some point. So this 280,000 in savings that's going in now, are we thinking about how much of that is going to erode when we lose those contracts on our rates in 2
Oh, I
or
see.
3 years?
So you're looking at
You
that
know, when-
number not simply as ESCO savings, but ESCO savings plus what Andrew
Well,
has
no.
done in negotiating the
that's
Well, right,
rates
if we
down.
don't, if we don't get, you know, right now, we have very nice rates. If we don't get those rates, moving out 2 or 3 years, this $280,000, which is a pretty decent chunk of what you've got here.
Well, the model
is-
does include some type of an inflation.
Escalator, yeah.
Escalator, yeah. So that's part of it, and we just did get our next 3-year
Right now, I think we went up
agreement,
too
and it
much.
wasn't a lot.
It
It
wasn't,
didn't go up too
not
much.
like-
Right.
Because
not
I know
like
residential
URI
has
rate.
gone, oh my gosh, I
Not
mean,
even
it's like
close.
15%, it's crazy.
Right.
No, I think it went up
Okay.
2 or 3%.
So that's-
At the most, I'm not.
Okay.
By committing
So
to
that
the-
consortium is still holding on,
It is,
keeping
and by
that cost.
committing to the
Right.
3 years, we got the lower rate.
Right,
Okay.
on
Yep.
an average.
But I think too, that that 218 isn't representative of what we're gonna save. Because I don't think that
280.
have we realized all the savings that we're going to realize in a particular year? Or is it going to be higher than 218?
Don't they guarantee
It's-
those?
For the
Don't
school
they
department,
guarantee?
it's
Yeah, they're
estimated
guaranteed.
280. They're guaranteed
They guarantee
Guaranteed
that.
in the
280.
contract for the school department.
Right, so
Yep.
that's the thing, so that it's gonna go up.
Be more than that?
Well, didn't you just say we were at 218 and you say 280? Or you
No,
said 218?
280.
No, 280 is the number that we were given. That's a guaranteed amount for next year.
Okay,
And if we don't hit it, then they pay us,
right, exactly.
Yep.
and they don't want to do that.
No.
Well, Dr. Hutchinson, I want to thank you, and the whole committee thanks you for your years of service. We're sad to see you go. After 6 years, Chris filled me in. I had to pass a note, so I turned myself in. I did 3 years as superintendent. And another 8 years. Okay, 8 years. And I know you spent a lot of time in Gloucester, but we hope you always consider this a home away from home.
It's a great place.
And we really appreciated your service and stability you brought to the district and the improvements you made over the years. So, thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Different angle than we're used to. Some new terms, too. Thank you.
Storm appreciate it.
Storm buff, I know, you have to write that one down.
So, we just have to talk about our next meeting and what we have going, so we don't need to adjourn yet, but we can
Okay.
certainly
We can,
dismiss our hardworking public servant.
Not quite new business, but last week we talked about the public safety negotiations that were coming. And included in your budget was an X% increase of year over year. I mean, how are you projecting, probably you can't speak much to it at all, otherwise you're giving away the game.
Yeah.
But do you feel comfortable with what you've set 2016 and 2000, and maybe the others?
I think so, because based on where they're leading, yeah, I think we'll be all set.
Okay.
Yeah. And you know, you realize that in that number that's reserved for
Yeah,
FY
thanks.
'18,
Thank you.
but that also includes some retirement money in it too, so it's not all going towards
Okay.
the negotiation, so we're not giving away the house or anything.
Thank you.
He's trying not to anyway. Any other questions?
I'm set. Thanks. Thank you.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Good
Good night.
And then, next week, we're up for public hearing. And so traditionally, we've had a public hearing, and it has not been tremendously well attended. We certainly hope to have more attendees. But basically, we'll open the meeting and ask for public comment or questions or concerns. It did get mentioned in the news article in the Tribune that our public hearing is that day, so that's, maybe that will generate some publicity.
Maybe it will.
So we'll do that, and then the other item for the agenda I think we should be thinking about is how we're gonna end the year with our recommendations and letter. So, it's keep with the theme of education. In terms of homework, I'm gonna start to think about some sort of a skeleton outline to put together to say, this is how we're gonna frame our letter, our recommendation to town meeting.
Report.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna be on the train a lot the next 2 days. I'll try to put some notes together and send them around just as an outline. And what I thought is we could use next week as a working session to flesh that out a little bit, and then maybe get a draft together to line edit on the 8th. And also on the 8th, the CPC will come on the 8th.
Yeah. Okay.
And does anyone have the most recent schedule in front of them? Because I do not.
I do,
Okay.
I think. It's from 3-2. Is that
Right.
about right? Yep.
Right. So I still haven't figured out where we're gonna meet on the 8th.
Yeah, it still says TBD.
I guess my thought would be we could stick at town hall, because that's a week, like this week, where we can't use the selectmen's meeting room. It's the second Wednesday of the month. So maybe we could meet in that little room next to it.
Well, why not?
Because that's
No one's gonna want us to listen to us put periods and commas and
Right.
insert words and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
As we get our report together. I mean, that's very boring TV.
Right.
So
So I'll firm that up and send that around.
Okay.
So I'll send those two things out this week, and then maybe we can parcel out the work. So we could all, if we are able by next week to kind of assign each, what I was thinking is maybe we'll come up with a few sections and we can farm the sections out to different authors, and then it's fine to produce a work product in the, kind of solo, and then we can paste it all together and edit it together on the 8th, and then we'll hear from the CPC, and then we'll pretty much be done beyond speaking with Andrew about actually making a recommendation about the trust funds and any adjustments that are made between now and town meeting, because we'd have to re-vote, and we'll have to vote on the budget items too, so those are our major things, I think. Getting the report together, doing the final vote on the budget, and making any adjustments that are left, I think that's pretty much what we have left.
do you think that we need to have an additional meeting to go over those reserve policy changes? Or do you think it's sufficient to do it by the email method that Andrew suggested?
I think, why don't we,
The stabilization,
Yeah, the
Special
stabilization
education.
reserve matters, and it
Right.
made me think, sort of, do we
I think
need
we have to
talk
take
to each other
No, I
about
think
those things?
Right, so should we why don't we do this for next week's agenda, what I'll add. So next week, we'll have public comment. Maybe we should have a discussion on the reserve funds. We can have outline of talk about an outline of the recommendations. Because there are 3 things, and then that's on the 1st, and then on the 8th, we'll be voting the budget. So we'll have to take a position on all the articles. you know, kind of like we did with the capital stabilization. We can run through all the financial articles and review them. And then we can finalize our recommendation, and we can vote on the reserve policies. That would be pretty consistent with how we do things, that we could discuss the reserves policy on the 1st, and vote it on the 8th. Does that make sense? Okay.
Along with the vote on the budget.
Right.
line items.
Right.
But that's gonna be a busy meeting.
Right, because we work really hard until they put the book together, and then we just sit back and wait for town meeting, so. That's the.
Does anybody that works with the school committee know the answer to this? I should have asked it while they were in here, but this is the booklet that we got from, that you had Patty print out for us, which is hugely helpful. Under technology, in the summary, they have a second paragraph here that says, in the proposed budget, funding's provided for some computer replacement but no personnel. So we talked about that at the elementary level. If DESE decides next fall on PARCC testing, we will not be able to provide the electronic access nor the technician support necessary to prepare for and administer the assessment. What does that mean?
Oh, so PARC is a new
Is that Common
controversial.
Core?
Yes, Common Core.
It's Common
assessment,
Core?
and taken through.
It's through computers.
Right.
Okay, so, yeah, I thought that's what this was. Are we, is there gonna be a fiscal impact if we're not prepared for that? I mean, you know, do we lose funding if we don't, you know, is
No,
this?
there is an option to take it using paper, but it's very cumbersome and very time consuming. PARC is basically the online replacement for MCAS, which is a paper test. It has some new features to it, and it's basically the same test, just put online. But you need to have enough technology to be able to take it, because students have to take it all simultaneously.
Right.
So that's an
If they're
issue.
talking about carts, we're not gonna be able to do that. If they're buying computer carts, we're not gonna have enough computers, let alone the
So
technicians.
that's essentially what that paragraph means, if they mandate it or not prepared for that. Nor is almost any other school district in the
Okay,
Commonwealth.
so, okay.
We're not alone in that. That's
Okay. Well,
part of the
for the
problem
unfunded,
that the state is facing is just arbitrarily mandating this and nobody being able to do it. So that's an issue. They were, a year ago, they seemed like they were definitely heading in this direction. Now, not so much.
Well, Common Core is being questioned in general, I mean, lots of people.
This is a little bit different than that.
This is just
You know,
the testing.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a whole different kind of an experience. Anyway, that's that.
Thanks. I was just, paragraph sort of surprised me.
Yeah.
Like, oh, if it's mandated, we won't be able to do it.
That's great. Okay, do we have a motion?
I'll move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.